They found her in the elevator. Not slumped in the corner like you'd expect from someone who'd collapsed. Not lying on the floor, standing upright, perfectly still, facing the closed doors as if waiting for them to open. Her eyes were open. Her hands hung loosely at her sides. Security footage showed she'd been standing in that exact position for 11 hours before anyone discovered her. The elevator had been stuck between the 4th and 5th floors of the Riverside Medical Plaza in Sacramento since 6:47 p.m. on March 3, 2021. Building maintenance finally got it moving again at 5:52 a.m. the next morning. When the doors opened on the ground floor, there she was. A janitor named Miguel Santos told police he'd thought she was just another early morning commuter, maybe someone annoyed about being stuck all night, until he said "good morning," and she didn't respond, didn't blink, didn't move at all. That's when he realized she was dead. I'm Rachel Martinez, and I've worked as an autopsy technician at the Sacramento County Coroner's Office for 16 years. Before that, I spent 3 years as an EMT and 2 years in nursing school before realizing I preferred working with the dead over the living. There's a clarity to death that life doesn't have. No ambiguity, no gray areas. Either the heart beats or it doesn't. Either breath moves through lungs or it doesn't. Death is binary, absolute, and most importantly, it follows rules. Chemical processes break down tissue in predictable ways. Blood pools according to gravity. Temperature drops at measurable rates. Insects colonize remains on reliable schedules. For 16 years, I've seen those rules hold true across thousands of cases. Murders, suicides, accidents, natural deaths. The mechanism might vary, but the aftermath always followed the same fundamental patterns. Until Elena Vasquez. Her case didn't announce itself as unusual. The intake form looked routine enough when I arrived at work that Thursday morning. Female, 29 years old, discovered unresponsive in elevator. Pronounced dead at scene by paramedics at 6:04 a.m. No obvious trauma. Suspected natural causes pending autopsy. The medical examiner assigned to the case was Dr. William Brennan, a methodical forensic pathologist I'd worked with for a decade. He was scheduled to begin the autopsy at 10 a.m. I prepped the suite as always, laid out instruments on sterile trays, scalpels, scissors, rib cutters, forceps, specimen containers, calibrated the scale, tested the digital recorder, verified the specimen refrigeration was holding at 38 degrees Fahrenheit, every action automatic after years of repetition, a meditation of precision and routine. Elena's body arrived at 9:15 a.m. The transport technician, a woman named Keisha Brown, seemed quieter than usual as we transferred the black body bag from her gurney to our examination table. I'd known Keisha for 8 years. She'd transported hundreds of bodies to our facility and maintained the same professional detachment I did. But today, something in her expression looked unsettled. "Strangest recovery I've done," she said as I signed the transfer log. "How so?" "Building security had to let us into the elevator shaft. She was just standing there, like a mannequin. We thought maybe rigor mortis had locked her in that position, but when we tried to move her..." She paused. "She was completely flexible, no rigor at all, just standing. Bodies don't stand on their own. Even in the immediate moments after death, before rigor mortis sets in, muscle tone disappears. The body collapses under its own weight. Gravity isn't negotiable. But I'd learned long ago not to trust second-hand descriptions. People see what they expect to see, especially in stressful situations. Memory becomes unreliable. I'd wait to form my own assessment. After Keisha left, I unzipped the body bag. Elena Vasquez looked like she could have been sleeping if sleeping people stood upright with their eyes open. She was petite, maybe 5 feet 3 inches, with long dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She wore business casual clothes, gray slacks, a white blouse, low heels. Her skin showed no lividity, the purple-red discoloration that appears when blood settles in the lowest parts of a body after death. That was wrong. She'd been standing for at least 11 hours. There should have been pronounced lividity in her legs and feet. I checked her hands, no defensive wounds, no signs of struggle. Her fingernails were neatly manicured, polish unchipped. I examined her neck. No ligature marks, no bruising, no indication of strangulation. Her face was peaceful, features relaxed. If I'd passed her on the street, I would have thought she was simply lost in thought, gazing at something in the middle distance. Except for her eyes. They were open, but the expression in them was what unsettled me. Most corpses I'd seen with open eyes had a vacant quality, the obvious absence of consciousness. Elena's eyes looked different. They looked focused, as if she'd been staring intently at something right before the moment of death, or right after. I photographed her thoroughly, documenting every angle as protocol required. Then I began taking initial measurements. Height, 62 inches. Weight, I helped position her on the scale. The digital readout flickered, jumped between numbers, then settled on 118 pounds. I frowned. Our scale was precise, medical-grade equipment. It didn't flicker. I tried again, carefully repositioning her. Same result. The numbers jumped erratically for several seconds before stabilizing. I made a note to have maintenance check the scale after the autopsy, though it had been calibrated just 2 days earlier and had worked perfectly on 3 other cases since then. Core body temperature was next. I used a chemical thermometer, making a small insertion into the liver, the organ that retains heat longest. The reading came back at 71.2 degrees Fahrenheit. That was close to room temperature, which made sense if she'd been standing in an elevator shaft for 11 hours. The building's temperature was probably around 70 degrees Fahrenheit. No thermal anomaly here. Dr. Brennan arrived at 9:50 a.m. with his usual coffee from the cafe across the street. He was in his late 50s, with silver hair and the kind of calm demeanor that comes from having seen every variation of death human bodies can experience. He reviewed the intake information while pulling on his scrubs. "Standing in the elevator," he said, more to himself than to me. "Interesting." Keisha said she was completely flexible when they moved her. No rigor mortis. He looked up. Time of discovery was 5:52 a.m. If she'd been standing there since the elevator stopped at 6:47 p.m. the previous evening, that's, he calculated quickly, approximately 11 hours. Rigor should have been fully developed by then. Unless time of death was much more recent, I suggested. Security footage would show that. He pulled on his gloves. Let's see what the body tells us. We began the external examination together, working methodically from head to toe. I took notes while Dr. Brennan narrated his observations into the recorder. Female, appearing stated age of 29, well-nourished, well-developed. No obvious external trauma. No petechiae in eyes or conjunctiva. No foam or purge from mouth or nose. No blood from ears. Pupils are dilated and fixed at approximately 6 millimeters bilaterally. He checked her scalp, running his fingers through her hair, searching for contusions or fractures. Nothing. He examined her mouth, checked her teeth. All present, no damage. He manipulated her jaw. No rigor mortis in facial muscles or jaw. He moved to her arms, bending them at the elbows, rotating the shoulders. No rigor mortis in upper extremities. He checked her hands more thoroughly than I had, examining under each fingernail with a magnifying lens. No subungual debris, no defensive wounds. The examination continued down her torso, legs, feet. Dr. Brennan was thorough to the point of obsessive, which was why he was one of the best forensic pathologists in the state. If there was something to find, he'd find it, but there was nothing. Elena Vasquez's body showed no signs of trauma, no indication of how she'd died. Even more puzzling, she showed no signs of having been dead for 11 hours. No rigor mortis, no significant lividity, no early decomposition changes. She looked like someone who died maybe 2 or 3 hours ago, not 11. "Rachel, what was the ambient temperature in that elevator?" "I can call building maintenance and ask." "Please do." I stepped out and made the call. The building engineer, a man named Tom Richardson, answered and checked his records. "Elevator shaft maintains roughly the same temperature as the building interior. Should have been around 68 to 70 degrees overnight." I relayed this to Dr. Brennan. He frowned. Not cold enough to significantly slow decomposition or delay rigor mortis. This doesn't make sense. He picked up the scalpel. Let's see what's going on internally. The Y incision is always the moment of revelation. The external body can hide secrets, but once you open the chest and abdominal cavities, the truth reveals itself. Diseased organs, internal bleeding, tumors, arterial blockages. Whatever killed the person almost always leaves evidence inside. Dr. Brennan made the first cut, from the right shoulder down to the sternum. Then from the left shoulder down to meet the first incision. Then straight down from the sternum to the pubic bone. The standard Y pattern that gives access to all major organs. He peeled back the chest flap, exposing the rib cage. Using rib cutters, he carefully removed the front of the rib cage to access the thoracic cavity. This is normally when we'd see the lungs, the heart, the great vessels. This is when everything becomes clear. Except it didn't. Dr. Brennan stood motionless, staring into Elena's chest cavity. I moved closer to see what had stopped him. The organs looked wrong, not diseased or damaged. Wrong in a way I'd never seen before. The lungs appeared normal in size and position, but their color was off. Instead of the typical gray-pink of healthy lung tissue or the darker, congested appearance of diseased lungs, they had an almost translucent quality, like frosted glass. I could see the branching bronchi through the tissue, which shouldn't have been possible. The heart looked similar. It was the right size, properly positioned, but the muscle tissue had the same strange translucency. The chambers were visible through the cardiac wall, as if the organ had been rendered in some kind of biological stained glass. "What am I looking at?" Dr. Brennan said quietly. I had no answer. He reached in with gloved hands and gently palpated the lungs. Texture feels normal. Maybe slightly firmer than usual, but not dramatically so. He moved to the heart, examining it carefully. No obvious, structural abnormalities. He picked up a scalpel and made a small incision in the left lung. The tissue parted cleanly, revealing internal structures that should have been opaque but weren't. He made another cut, deeper. Same result. The lung tissue was semi-transparent throughout. "Rachel, have you ever seen anything like this?" "Never." He removed the lungs entirely, weighing each one. Right lung, 420 grams. Left lung, 380 grams. Both within normal range. He sectioned them further, examining the bronchi, the alveoli, the blood vessels. Everything appeared anatomically correct except for that impossible translucency. The heart came next. He removed it, weighed it. 280 grams, normal for a woman of Elena's size. He examined the coronary arteries, finding no blockages. He opened each chamber. The valves looked healthy. No blood clots, no tumors, no congenital defects. Just that same unnatural translucence in the tissue. We continued through every organ. The liver showed the same quality, structurally normal, functionally appearing healthy, but with that glass-like transparency that made no biological sense. The kidneys, spleen, pancreas, intestines, all the same. Dr. Brennan worked in increasing silence. I could see his mind racing, trying to fit what we were observing into some framework of known pathology. After 2 hours, he stepped back from the table. "I need to consult with someone. Continue with specimen collection. I want tissue samples from every organ. Full toxicology panel. We're also sending samples to pathology for microscopic examination and to the university's research lab if they'll take them." "What do I tell them we're looking for?" "I have no idea." He pulled off his gloves. "Some kind of cellular transformation. Protein denaturation, maybe. But I've seen cooked tissue, frozen tissue, tissue destroyed by radiation or chemicals. This isn't like any of that." He left to make calls while I continued specimen collection. As I worked, I kept glancing at Elena's face. Those open eyes, still focused on something I couldn't see. I found myself wondering what she'd been looking at in that elevator. What had she seen in the moments before or after death? Dr. Brennan returned an hour later with Dr. Linda Chen, the head of cellular pathology at UC Davis Medical Center. I'd met her once before at a forensic conference. She had a reputation for diagnostic brilliance and an encyclopedic knowledge of rare diseases. She examined the organs we'd removed, now carefully arranged in specimen containers. Her expression shifted from professional interest to confusion to something approaching alarm. "This is remarkable," she said, holding up a section of liver tissue to the light. "The cellular structure appears intact, but the protein matrix has somehow become partially transparent. I've never seen anything like it outside of laboratory preparations using clearing agents." "Clearing agents?" I asked. "Chemicals used to make tissue transparent for microscopic examination. Benzyl alcohol, methyl salicylate, things like that. But this would require the entire body to be perfused with these agents, and there's no way that happened naturally. Even if she'd been exposed to them environmentally, the pattern would be different. External tissues would show the greatest effect, not internal organs." Dr. Brennan leaned against the examination table. "Could this be genetic? Some kind of connective tissue disorder? There are conditions that affect collagen and protein structure, but nothing that produces this effect. And if this were genetic, she would have experienced symptoms her entire life. You don't suddenly develop transparent organs at age 29. "What if it's not genetic?" I said slowly. "What if something changed her tissue recently, hours or days before death?" Dr. Chen considered this. "That would require a catalyst, something that triggered rapid protein restructuring throughout her entire body. But I can't think of any toxin, disease, or environmental factor that would do this." "We're running a complete toxicology panel," Dr. Brennan said. "Results won't be back for a few days, but we tested for the standard range: alcohol, drugs, common poisons." "Test for everything," Dr. Chen said. "Heavy metals, industrial chemicals, research compounds, anything you can think of. I'll take these tissue samples back to my lab. We'll do electron microscopy, protein analysis, everything in our capability." She paused at the door. "Dr. Brennan, you should contact the CDC. If this is some kind of unknown biological agent or environmental exposure, there could be public health implications." After she left, Dr. Brennan and I stood in the quiet autopsy suite, the pieces of Elena Vasquez laid out before us like an impossible puzzle. "What do I put in the preliminary report?" I asked. He was quiet for a long time. "Cause of death: undetermined pending further investigation. Manner of death: undetermined. Notable findings: extensive alteration of tissue opacity throughout all examined organs. Etiology unknown." "The family is going to want answers." "I know. But I can't give them answers I don't have." Over the next 3 days, I couldn't stop thinking about Elena Vasquez. During other autopsies, during paperwork, during my commute home, her case occupied a persistent corner of my mind. That image of her standing in the elevator, eyes open, waiting for doors that would never open on their own. I started digging into her background, something I don't usually do. Our job is bodies, not biographies. But I needed context, some thread that might explain the unexplainable. Elena had been a research chemist at BioNexus Solutions, a pharmaceutical company located in the same building where she died. She'd worked there for 3 years since finishing her PhD at Stanford. Her colleagues described her as brilliant, dedicated, occasionally obsessive about her projects. She'd been working late the night she died, which wasn't unusual. Several co-workers had seen her in the lab as late as 6:30 p.m. She'd left work at approximately 6:45 p.m., according to her lab partner, Marcus Webb. A different Marcus Webb, I noted, not the one from the second story you sent me, just an unfortunate coincidence of names. She'd told Marcus she had a headache and was going home early. She'd walked to the elevator, pressed the call button, and the doors had opened. She'd stepped inside. The elevator had gotten stuck between floors less than 2 minutes later. I obtained the security footage from building management. The recording from the elevator interior showed Elena pressing the button for the ground floor. She'd stood facing the doors as the elevator began to descend. Then, abruptly, the lights flickered. The elevator lurched to a stop. The emergency lighting activated. Elena had stumbled slightly, caught herself against the wall. She'd pressed the alarm button. No response. She'd tried her cell phone. No signal in the elevator shaft. She'd pressed the call button repeatedly. Nothing. For the first 40 minutes, the footage showed exactly what you'd expect. A woman trapped in a stuck elevator, growing progressively more anxious. She'd paced. She'd tried the emergency phone. She'd attempted to pry the doors open, all normal reactions. Then, at approximately 7:34 p.m., something changed. Elena stopped pacing. She stood very still in the center of the elevator, head tilted slightly as if listening to something. After several seconds, she moved to face the doors. She stood there, hands at her sides, and simply waited. She didn't move again for the next 10 hours and 18 minutes. Not once. Not to sit down, not to shift her weight, not even to check her watch. She stood facing those closed doors with the patience of a statue. Around 3 a.m., her eyes slowly closed. At 3:47 a.m., they opened again. That was the only movement the camera captured. At 5:52 a.m., when maintenance finally got the elevator moving and the doors opened on the ground floor, she was still standing in that exact position. I watched the footage 3 times, trying to understand what I was seeing. The timestamp was continuous, no gaps or edits. Elena Vasquez had simply stopped acting like a living human being at 7:34 p.m. and had stood motionless for over 10 hours until she was discovered. But here was the thing that made my skin crawl. I couldn't identify the exact moment she died. There was no collapse, no visible distress, no moment where a living person became a dead one. She just stopped, and then continued standing. I shared the footage with Dr. Brennan. He watched it twice, his expression growing more troubled. This suggests she was already dead, or in some catastrophic neurological state well before she was discovered, he said. But that doesn't align with the lack of lividity or rigor mortis. If she'd been standing dead for 10 hours, we would have seen massive blood pooling in her legs. Instead, we saw almost none. What if her blood stopped pooling normally? I suggested. What if the same thing that made her organs transparent affected her blood? Blood doesn't just stop following the laws of physics. Her body stopped following a lot of rules. He couldn't argue with that. The toxicology results came back on day 5. I was in the office when Dr. Brennan called me to his desk, the lab report displayed on his computer screen. "This can't be right," he said. I looked at the results. Standard toxicology panel. Negative for alcohol, negative for common drugs, negative for opioids, negative for benzodiazepines, negative for barbiturates. Extended panel. Negative for heavy metals, negative for carbon monoxide, negative for cyanide, negative for organophosphates. But there was one result that stood out, an unknown compound present in significant concentrations throughout all tested tissues. The lab couldn't identify it, Dr. Brennan said. It's not in any of their databases. They've sent the samples to the FBI's forensic chemistry lab and to a private research facility that specializes in novel compounds. Could it be something from her work? She was a research chemist. That's what I'm thinking. I contacted BioNexus Solutions to request information about what Elena was working on. They refused, cited proprietary research protections. I've escalated it to the CDC and OSHA. If she was exposed to something dangerous at work, we need to know. 2 days later, Dr. Chen called with her microscopy results. I was present when Dr. Brennan put her on speaker. "The cellular structure is intact," she said, her voice tight with confusion. "Individual cells appear normal under standard microscopy. But when I examined the protein structures using electron microscopy, I found something extraordinary. The proteins have restructured themselves into a crystalline lattice pattern." "Crystalline?" Dr. Brennan repeated. "I don't know how else to describe it. The proteins haven't denatured or broken down, they've reorganized. It's like they've been redesigned at the molecular level. This explains the transparency. The regular crystalline structure allows light to pass through in ways normal tissue doesn't." "Is this survivable?" I asked. "Could she have been alive when this was happening?" Silence on the line. Then, "I don't see how. This restructuring would have affected every cell in her body. Neural tissue, muscle tissue, blood vessels, everything. There's no way the body could have maintained function during this transition. But she was functioning, Dr. Brennan said. The security footage shows her moving normally up until 7:34 p.m. After that, she stood still for over 10 hours. Then the transformation must have happened rapidly, Dr. Chen said. Perhaps in minutes or even seconds, fast enough that she was still standing when it completed. What could cause this? I asked. Nothing natural. This would require external intervention, some kind of catalyst that triggered simultaneous protein restructuring throughout the entire body. I've never seen anything like it, and I've been studying cellular pathology for 23 years. After the call ended, Dr. Brennan and I sat in heavy silence. "We need to get inside that lab," he finally said. "We need to know what she was working on." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Elena's lab partner, Marcus Webb, contacted our office directly. He'd heard about our investigation and wanted to talk. Dr. Brennan and I met him at a coffee shop near the BioNexus building the next morning. Marcus was in his early 30s, thin, with the kind of exhausted eyes that come from not sleeping well. He ordered coffee he didn't drink and spoke in a low, urgent voice. "They're covering it up," he said. "BioNexus. They're scrubbing all of Elena's research, threatening everyone with NDAS and legal action if we talk." "What was she working on?" Dr. Brennan asked. Marcus glanced around the coffee shop, verifying no one was close enough to overhear. "Protein engineering, specifically developing compounds that could alter protein structure for medical applications. The goal was to create treatments for protein-folding diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's." "Did something go wrong?" 3 weeks ago, Elena had a breakthrough. She synthesized a compound, we called it NX47, that could trigger controlled protein restructuring in vitro. It worked beautifully on isolated tissue samples. The proteins would reorganize into more stable configurations. It was revolutionary. He paused, hands trembling slightly around his untouched coffee cup. "She wanted to test it further. I told her we should slow down, run more safety protocols. But Elena was convinced we were on the verge of something that would save millions of lives. She started working extended hours, running experiments I wasn't aware of." "Did she test it on herself?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Marcus nodded miserably. "I think so. The day before she died, I found an empty NX47 sample vial in the lab. I asked her about it. She said it had been a calibration error, that the sample had been mislabeled as full when it was empty, but I didn't believe her. And that night, she stayed late, alone." "Where is this compound now?" Dr. Brennan asked. "That's the thing. It's gone, all of it. The company confiscated every sample the day after Elena died. They cleaned out her lab, destroyed her notes, wiped the computer servers. They're claiming her research was preliminary and showed no promising results. But you have proof otherwise." Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a flash drive. "I backed up some of her notes before they could delete everything. It's not much, but it's something. Her synthesis protocols, safety concerns she documented, observations from her last experiments." He slid the drive across the table. "I don't know what NX47 did to her, but whatever it was, BioNexus knows, and they're terrified of anyone finding out." Dr. Brennan took the drive. "This could be evidence in a criminal investigation. You understand that?" "I understand Elena is dead, and someone needs to know why." We reviewed the files that evening. Elena's notes painted a picture of brilliant but increasingly reckless experimentation. Her early results with NX47 had been promising. The compound successfully altered protein structures in cultured cells and tissue samples. But her safety notes grew more concerned as the research progressed. One entry, dated 2 weeks before her death, stood out. NX47 showing cascade effects in complex tissue matrices. Initial restructuring triggers adjacent proteins to follow same pattern. Effect propagates through entire sample within 4 to 6 hours. Need to understand propagation mechanics before advancing. Possible applications for systemic protein diseases, but control mechanisms not yet established. risk of uncontrolled restructuring. Another entry, dated 5 days before her death. Theoretical question: if NX-47 were introduced to living system, could natural regulatory mechanisms prevent cascade? Or would restructuring propagate unchecked? Mammalian trials needed, but ethics approval will take months. Need better models. The final entry was dated the day she died. Sometimes science requires courage. History remembers those who dared. M would say, I'm being reckless. Maybe I am. But what if this works? What if we can actually rebuild diseased proteins in living patients? One small dose. Controlled environment. I'll monitor myself carefully. If anything goes wrong, The note ended there, unfinished. She injected herself, I said. That's what happened in the lab before she left. She took NX-47 and then got in the elevator. Dr. Brennan was reading another file. According to her calculations, protein restructuring should have taken 4 to 6 hours to propagate through the entire body. She thought she'd have time to monitor the effects, to stop the cascade if something went wrong. But it happened faster, I said, understanding now. She got in the elevator at 6:45 p.m. By 7:34 p.m., 49 minutes later, she'd stopped moving. The restructuring must have accelerated once it started in a living system. And she stood there for 10 more hours while it completed. Dr. Brennan finished. While every protein in her body reorganized itself into a crystalline lattice, while she transformed into something that could no longer sustain life, but maintained structural integrity long after death should have caused collapse. I thought about that security footage. Elena standing motionless, eyes open, waiting. Had she been aware during those hours? Had she felt her body changing from the inside, proteins unfolding and refolding into new configurations? Or had consciousness ended the moment the cascade reached her brain, leaving only a body that no longer remembered how to fall? We turned the evidence over to the CDC and the California Department of Public Health. An investigation was launched into BioNexus Solutions. The company eventually admitted to Elena's research but maintained she had violated protocols by testing the compound on herself without authorization. They provided their remaining NX-47 samples for analysis and destruction. The official cause of death on Elena's certificate was listed as acute systemic protein restructuring secondary to exposure to experimental pharmaceutical compound. Manner of death: accident. But I've never been satisfied with that conclusion. An accident implies a lack of intention, a random misfortune. Elena Vasquez knew exactly what she was doing when she injected that compound. She'd read her own safety notes. She'd documented the risks. She'd chosen to proceed anyway, believing the potential benefit outweighed the danger. She'd been wrong, but her choice had been deliberate. I think about her often, especially late at night when I'm alone in the autopsy suite. I think about what it means to die slowly while still standing, to feel your body transform into something beautiful and terrible and incompatible with life. To have 10 hours to contemplate what you've done to yourself while trapped in an elevator between floors, between life and death, unable to reverse the cascade you've triggered. Did she regret it? Did she try to scream but find her crystalline vocal cords could no longer vibrate? Did she try to move but discover her restructured muscles no longer responded to neural signals? Or had the transformation taken her consciousness first? A mercy that left only her body to complete the terrible metamorphosis. I'll never know. The dead keep their secrets, even when we open them up and examine every cell. What haunts me most isn't the translucent organs or the impossible way she died. It's the look in her eyes in that security footage. That focused, waiting expression. Because I've seen that look before on other bodies. That sense of watching something invisible. Something the living can't perceive. And I wonder if, in those final hours, Elena saw something we couldn't. If the restructuring of her proteins allowed her to perceive reality in ways human biology normally prevents. If she stood waiting for those elevator doors to open onto something that had nothing to do with the ground floor of an office building. The case is officially closed. The evidence has been filed away. BioNexus paid a settlement to Elena's family and shut down their protein engineering division. Marcus Webb left the company and now works at a university lab with strict ethics oversight. But I still have nightmares about that elevator, about standing in a small metal box while your body betrays you at the molecular level, restructuring itself into something crystalline and translucent and dead. About waiting with impossible patience for doors that open onto nothing you expected. I've been an autopsy technician for 16 years. I've seen death in every form it takes. But Elena Vasquez taught me that the boundary between life and death isn't always a moment. Sometimes it's a process. Sometimes it's hours spent standing perfectly still while your proteins forget how to be human. And that terrifies me more than any violence, any disease, any trauma I've ever seen on my table. Because at least those deaths were fast. At least they were final. Elena's death was neither.